Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here. Just got out of a screening of the new film Mandy at the Alamo Drafthouse in Brooklyn. And before I get to my official review, I should just say I'm going to be resorting to some very strong hyperbole in my praise for this movie. Ordinarily, I worry that if I overpraise or oversell a movie, that I might be setting up expectations way too high for anyone willing to take my advice on what to see. But I had so much damn fun watching Mandy in the theater, I'm going to throw all caution to the wind. And I'm just going to surrender to the fact that I just had an experience that I can only describe as complete, total ecstasy. When diehard cinephiles are talking about great movie-going experiences, oftentimes they'll use the expression pure, raw cinema. And I can safely say without hesitation that this new movie from writer-director Panos Cosmatos is pure, raw cinema. Watching it at the Draft House with an enthusiastic crowd that was fired up and ready to watch this movie, it has to rank as one of the best movie-going experiences I've ever had. I don't necessarily say it's one of the best movies I've ever seen, but in terms of a movie-going experience, where the conditions are perfect, where the projection is excellent, where the crowd turns off their phones, where they're laughing and screaming and having a blast at all the right places. This is what going to the movies is all about. And the movie's unlike anything I've ever seen before. It completely defies categorization, because it's completely original, it's utterly unique. And I think I was about 5 or 10 minutes into the movie before I realized that I was watching a classic unfold before my eyes. Decades from now, I'm sure I'm going to bump into young movie freaks who are going to be jealous beyond words that I was actually there in the theater on opening weekend for this movie. The movie, sadly, is having a very limited release plan, but is actually going online tomorrow on iTunes and Vudu and a few other platforms. I have no idea if watching the movie at home if I would have had the same experience. Like I said, everything about the movie-going experience was perfect. But I have a feeling if you turn off all the lights, turn off your phone and devices, tell everybody to go away, put on the best headphones you have, and get the screen a few inches from your face, you might have a chance at having this completely immersive, hallucinatory, hysterical, thrilling, emotional experience that I just had. Because I'm constantly preparing for new episodes of my podcast, Wrong Reel, I have a pretty steady diet of movies in my life. So much so that at times it can kind of drain all the pleasure out of the movie-going experience. But this movie was a vivid reminder of what my initial movie fanaticism was all about when I was a much younger person. At the end of the movie, I was completely limp, but it wasn't limp with exhaustion like fatigue. It's the kind of limp feeling you might experience if you've been up all night drinking and having sex and partying and taking drugs all night. And as I was riding back from Brooklyn on the subway, I had this crazy experience where I was sitting there about 30 minutes later, and I was playing over a lot of the details of the movie in my mind, and I got so happy and euphoric, I almost started crying then and there. And maybe that's just a vivid reminder of the fact that when it comes to great movie-going experiences, they're pretty rare, they're pretty special, and we really have to cherish them when they come around. This was a surreal, beautiful nightmare filled with violence and humor and sex appeal and insanity, and it was a dreamlike experience from which I never really wanted to wake up. While this movie does defy easy categorization in terms of specific genres, probably the easiest way to sell it is as a horror experience, and I imagine what I'm feeling right now is pretty similar to what a lot of people felt like when they first walked out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Exorcist or Suspiria, the great horror experiences of the 1970s. And at the risk of overpraising the movie, I feel like Panos Cosmatos has found a way to resurrect everything great about Italian horror, whether you're talking about Mario Bava or Dario Argento or Lucio Fulci. Without this film being a direct homage to their work, it does have that beautiful hallucinatory power that the best of those movies have to offer. And I'd never even heard of this filmmaker until a day or so ago. As it turns out, he's the son of director George P. Cosmatos, a director I'm not really familiar with, but he did direct one of my favorite westerns from my childhood. He directed Tombstone, and Panos Cosmatos, one of the first gigs he had in the movie business, was working for his dad on that movie back in 1993. But getting back to how this movie compares to the current landscape of film, I feel like so many movies today are wallowing in nostalgia for a bygone era. They're either dusting off or rebooting or resetting an established franchise from way back when, basically mining the ideas of the past for all that they're worth, or they're just wallowing hopelessly in cultural Easter eggs and trivia and details like that. And when people wallow in that kind of nostalgia, I feel like it only serves to underline the fact that we have so few great movie-going experiences to enjoy here in 2018. And because the movie stars Nicolas Cage, I think there are going to be a lot of snarky, kind of condescending hipsters who look at the movie as nothing more than yet another vehicle where Nicolas Cage can completely freak out. But if you're going to see the movie just to see a Nicolas Cage freak out performance, this might be the best. He's got a long list of movies where he completely freaks out, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not. But if you love Raising Arizona, and if you love Wild at Heart, if you love these classic movies that made Nicolas Cage a worldwide superstar, you're going to love Mandy. The Alamo Drafthouse did this wonderful, beautiful thing before the movie started where they showed a highlight reel of all the great Nicolas Cage Cage freakout scenes from different movies. And this includes a lot of the dumb action movies he's made, or complete total creative misfires like the remake of The Wicker Man. And it was almost like having a comedian come out and warm up the crowd before the main event. It put the audience in the perfect mood, and when this movie started, we were ready to go. And the director's co-writer, Aaron Stewart-Ahn, actually came on and introduced the movie, and he was telling a few stories about the director. He's not really known for his public speaking skills, and I'm paraphrasing here, but apparently came out on the stage at one of the festival screenings and said this was an incredibly personal movie about his dead parents, and it was also a lot of fun. So before I get into my spoiler section, it might be helpful if I actually say what this movie is about. I've been going like 10 minutes now, and I haven't even given the premise of the movie. And it's not that complicated of a premise, but basically Nicolas Cage and Andrea Riseborough, they play a couple living out in the wilderness. They're absolutely in love. She's very creative. She does a lot of illustrations. She loves reading fantasy novels. And Nicolas Cage plays a character named Red Miller, who spends most of his time out in the woods with chainsaws, chopping down trees, very much like a man's man. But these two characters are absolutely, totally, hopelessly in love. It's actually one of the most sweet, compelling love stories in recent memory. And I probably would have been totally happy just watching a 2-hour movie about them being in love. But all hell breaks loose when the most deranged, crazed group of religious psychopaths you've ever seen drive through the area. They decide they want to take Mandy for themselves. And in a ritual bordering on the supernatural, they summon up seemingly from the depths of hell this biker gang to help them in this really sick and twisted fantasy that they want to try to make into a reality for their religious messiah. And what follows is so screwed up and so violent and so fun and so exciting. It becomes this great revenge saga, but it's got animation and incredible music, great fight scenes, genuine intense horror sequences, unlike anything I've seen since like Hellraiser. And if you watch the trailer, you'll get a small taste of it, but there is so much in this movie to enjoy. And obviously watching movies is an incredibly subjective experience, but this movie found a way to tap into so many things that I love and adore about storytelling in general. But I have absolutely no problem whatsoever saying that Mandy is my favorite movie of the year. There's not even a close second. And I'm just chomping at the bit to buy this movie on iTunes tomorrow and do the deep dive all over again. So I am ready to dive into some specifics about the movie. So if you don't want any spoilers, bail out now. If you live in one of the areas where the movie's being released, definitely go see it in a theater and take as many friends as you possibly can and get crazy and get wild. Because if you are a true, genuine lover of cinema, and if you are, you know who you are, this is the kind of outrageous cinema that true cinephiles live for. So with all my spoiler warnings out of the way, let's do the deep dive and do a few of the things that make this movie so fucking special. So when it comes to discussing movies or music or novels or just art in general, one of the trends that I've always despised, where I see people who only watch movies that they can make fun of or only listen to music that they can ridicule, because I know deep down they probably genuinely, sincerely actually love the stuff they're watching, but they're embarrassed to admit it, especially if they're a writer working for a prominent website or a magazine or a newspaper. And when it comes to Nicolas Cage, I've definitely been guilty of that as well. And I feel like he has definitely brought it on himself. Nicolas Cage has made many movies, and not all of them have been made equal. But every once in a while, he'll remind us of just how good he can be. A perfect example would be Kick-Ass in his death scene where his daughter's trying to save him. And he delivered this eerie, bone-chilling performance that was absolutely incredible. But it takes about half the movie before Nicolas Cage really takes center stage in this, because for the first half of the movie, this is all about the character that the movie's named after, Mandy Bloom, played by Andrea Riseborough. I'm not super familiar with her work, but I absolutely loved her in the movie Birdman, which came out in 2014. But her face is so expressive, and her eyes are so enormous. And she has this strange, supernatural, otherworldly quality to her in this that makes her resemble something out of like a fairy tale or a myth or a legend. She has this long, dark hair, and she's always wearing all these great heavy metal shirts like Black Sabbath and Motley Crue. And I have a feeling metal fans are going to go berserk over this movie. They're going to probably say that this is the most metal movie ever made. Quite literally the most metal movie at times. And as you can tell from my background, I'm a big fan of fantasy and science fiction and comics. And one of the things that absolutely made me love her is the fact that she's always got her nose buried in this fantasy novel throughout the first third of the movie. And there are these great long sequences where she's reading paragraphs from the book. That is a very hard thing to make compelling on the screen, but I was absolutely riveted. And I don't know if these fantasy novels are actual real books, but so far I've been unable to find any information about the novels that are featured in the movie. But if they do in fact exist, I'll definitely be adding them to the collection. But all hell breaks loose when Jeremiah and his devout followers, Jeremiah is played by Linus Roach, and he's absolutely astonishing in this, but they're just the weirdest, strangest, dirty, hippie Jesus freaks ever caught on film, and they basically worship Jeremiah as a god. But he says, bring Mandy to me, and they set about doing it. And because this whole movie is infused with such an overwhelming and kind of supernatural flavor, I actually did think at this point the movie was drifting into supernatural territory, because one of Jeremiah's followers blows on this horn a few times, and out of the darkness shows up this biker gang from hell, and they're as mysterious and beautiful and terrifying as basically the Cenobites from Hellraiser. And the filmmaker did such a brilliant job of not really letting us see them. They're always shown in profile. We can see their armor, and we can see their spikes, and we can hear their sounds, and we can see their weapons, but we never really get a good look at them. And there's one shot of them in the woods with Jeremiah's followers that I think is going to go down as one of the best shots in the history of the horror genre. And because Jeremiah has several mouth-breathing, inbred, slack-jawed morons at his disposal, he basically gives one of them to these monsters from hell to do with as they like. And this is when the movie goes into very strange but very cool druggy territory, where Jeremiah basically puts on this giant performance trying to seduce Mandy and trying to bring Mandy into the fold. And he's talking about religion and God and playing music, and they're feeding her drugs. And this whole performance ends when he finally pulls off his robe and stands before her. But as it turns out, Jeremiah, he's a middle-aged guy, he's not very fit, and he's got this small, limp, little uncircumcised penis that is not particularly impressive. And Mandy just starts to howl with laughter. She's terrified. She's doped up on God knows what. She knows that her fellow Red very well might be dead, but she just starts laughing and mocking this guy. And it was absolutely hysterical just seeing how humiliated this guy was. And this is when the movie gets really dark, because they throw her in her bag, they drag her outside, they douse it in gasoline, they hang her right in front of Red Miller. And Red Miller, they have him chained up with barbed wire, like barbed wire on his mouth, barbed wire around his wrists. I mean, he's in rough shape, and he has to sit there and watch the love of his life burn to death before his eyes. The hippies leave him to die, but eventually he gets free, and we get this really tender scene where he's basically cradling the ashes of her bones, saying goodbye. And then suddenly the movie turns into a Nicolas Cage vehicle, finds this new gear, and becomes this insanely entertaining revenge fantasy from that point on. And the movie whips out one of the best secret weapons it could possibly have. Actor Bill Duke as the character Carruthers. I mean, I've been a fan of Bill Duke since I saw him in like Commando and Predator way back in the day, but he's great in The Limey. And Bill Duke, if you've seen him in anything, I know you're a fan. But he's one of Nicolas Cage's buddies. And not only does he have a lot of Nicolas Cage's weapons, like this giant crossbow and these special arrows which he said will go through human bone like a fat kid through cake, but he's also got all the lore and all the background info on these crazy hippies and these bikers who are living off in the mountains. And as dark and savage as this movie might be at this point, it's also still insanely funny. Like when Nicolas Cage first comes into the house after the death of Mandy, there's this strange commercial playing on TV of this goblin puking macaroni and cheese all over these kids. It was absolutely hysterical. And we get a scene that is easily the best Nick Cage freakout ever caught on film, where he goes into the bathroom. He's not even wearing pants. He's just wearing whitey tighties. And he grabs a bottle of vodka and starts chugging the vodka and starts pouring the vodka all over his injuries on his wrists. And he's screaming and losing his mind and like massaging his throat and chugging more vodka. It is so intense, but it's like all this pressure's been building up in the audience for so long, and finally we get to let off a little steam. And as Red begins his quest, the movie just keeps getting better and better. It starts employing all these astonishingly cool animated sequences featuring Mandy Bloom, and it's all this great imagery of her as like a rotting corpse or reaching into monsters and pulling jewels out. It reminded me quite a bit of a lot of the animation style you might have seen in the movie Heavy Metal, a movie that's absolutely one of a kind and a very special movie and very near and dear to my heart. But we also have these insane scenes where Red Miller is making weapons, almost like the opening credit sequence to Conan the Barbarian. If you're a fan of Conan, and if you're not, shame on you, but we see Conan's father and his mother making this kick-ass sword. It's one of the all-time great opening credit sequences, but Nicolas Cage makes this giant axe with like a giant spear on the end, and he's just ready to go to war. And when he does so, it's in this valley that looks like something out of like a Frank Frazetta painting come to life. We don't really get a great image of it until the very end, but it doesn't even look like Earth. It's like multiple planets up in the sky and all these crazy rock formations. It's like the most bizarre, insane, dark adult fantasy you've ever seen. And as Red Miller goes to war with not only the hippies, but also the biker gang, the movie just gets so insanely cool. And like in the middle of fight scenes, he'll be snorting cocaine. It has probably the most epic chainsaw battle ever caught on film. I mean, the crowd is basically on their feet with thunderous approval during this chainsaw battle. And it slowly but surely leads to this incredibly cathartic, explosive finale that, like I said, left me completely limp with ecstasy. I had the world's biggest dopey grin on my face at the end of it, and I was like splayed out in my chair like a damn starfish. But it was such an insanely fun roller coaster. It was transgressive, it was imaginative. In any event, I'm suddenly realizing just how exhausted I am from this experience. So I'm going to wrap this video up because I still need to edit the sucker, and I've been ranting and raving at this point for far too long. So I strongly encourage everybody out there to hunt this movie down. If you're a love of great genre cinema, whether it's great grindhouse movies or classic horror movies or great spaghetti westerns, if you love classic genre cinema, you know who you are. This is a movie that's been made for you. It makes so many other movies out there seem so trivial and so insignificant and so self-important and so pretentious. There's absolutely nothing about this movie that's pretentious. And I don't care what Panos Cosmatos does next. I don't care if it's a movie about the phone book. I'm going to be there on day one, front row, center, ready to eat it up. So thanks for checking out this video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed my completely ridiculous rant, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk more, you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrax, or you can just leave me a comment in the comments below. But I hope everyone has an amazing weekend, and as always, onwards and upwards.